Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're joining us from around the world. Welcome to Web3 Warriors, episode 36, featuring Neeraj Kashyap, CEO of Moonstream.to. Welcome, Neeraj. How are you doing today?
Thanks for having me on, David. I'm doing well. How are you?
Very good, very good. Thanks for joining us today. I'm excited to talk Web3 gaming with you. But yes, welcome everybody to Web3 Warriors. I am David Karoma. I go by Chrome in the Metaverse. I'm your host. And as we do on Web3 Warriors, we're here to talk about the creator economy and what's being built on the blockchain. And specifically, a favorite topic of ours at Web3 Warriors is gaming and what's really possible in the metaverse, in the digital sphere, and really just the potential for video games to actually become much more lucrative and value to be spread, among the developers that create the game, but also the gamers who enjoy the game and make the game come to life, really, through community, through taking part in all the fun stuff that happens in video games. I've often talked about the fact that my background in gaming really pulled me into the digital space. I was always thinking about the metaverse before I even thought about it in those terms, as an escape, and as video games offer a creative, healthy, and safe kind of escape for people, and mostly creative people, but also just people who want to entertain themselves and have fun. And especially if you're in a scenario maybe where life is difficult or you just, not everything's perfect. I think video games often offer that kind of safe, almost like a mental health kind of like time away from any difficulties you face in real life. That's just been my view of video games. Maybe it's a bit of a romanticized view. But with that in mind, when I found out about the fact that basically NFTs and blockchain are adding this whole new layer of value potentially to video games, and whether it's the assets in the games, the clothes you're wearing, the items that you have, the car, weapons, whatever the case might be, each one of those can be a digital asset that you actually own in your own sovereign wallet, right? And beyond that, the actual space that you're running around in, the land that you have in a metaverse, you could actually own the land itself and then build whatever you want on that and own it in your own sovereign wallet. So that was like mind blown to me as a gamer, and that's really what pulled me in to the crypto space and the NFT space initially. I often say it's the gaming that pulled me in, but it's the culture that's kept me in, and really seeing the impact that this creator economy has had for all of the people that are really taking advantage of it. It's really inspiring. So with that, I do want to thank everybody who does join us in the live stream. We officially got affiliate status on our Twitch account, so that was real cool. So you can now subscribe and support in a myriad of ways, and we're working on rebranding and upgrading the channel to align with that as well. So really excited. We'll have a lot more content coming out soon on that end. So before I get to Neeraj and really get some more expert insight on the topic of Web3 gaming, I thought I'd share a little bit of my kind of perspective of it right now. I still, as coming from kind of the background of gaming, look to, maybe some of the higher end games and, Grand Theft Auto, for example, or Fortnite, Call of Duty. And we don't really have that kind of fidelity in the Web3 gaming space yet, I don't think. And so we'll talk to Neeraj about that. But when I look at Web3 games right now, I basically see it as like 3, maybe 4 categories, right? So on one hand, you kind of have the Axie Infinity and maybe CryptoKitties type of vibe, where it's almost like kind of an economy of scale, essentially, where you're buying and trading these digital assets. Once you purchase one asset, you can get access to the game, and then within the game, maybe you're breeding or maybe you're farming, but you're kind of just doing micro kind of work, you could say, to try to build up more digital in-game assets that you can then sell. Or in the case of CryptoKitties, I believe you're like breeding, you're making more kitties, and there's some other kind of small games within the game that you can play and kind of accrue their in-game currency and then sell that. So my criticism of these kind of games is that like they're just not that fun to me personally. They're kind of more of like a trade and almost just like a trading card game, more so than an actual video game per se, like a digital trading card almost. So that's one angle, right? And then on the other side, there's also some of these NFT games that I've seen where you can purchase your NFT and it kind of allows you access to a more basic, maybe 2D game. A lot of them tend to be built off of kind of classics that we know. So one example that comes to mind for me is the Nifty League. The Nifty League Degens, they've created a really cool game that you need to own one of their Degen tokens in order to access it. But once you do, you can go and play their game. It's called Nifty Smashers, and it's basically like Smash Brothers, anybody who's familiar with that game, on the blockchain, where you get to play as the NFT that you've purchased, right? So the NFT grants you access to the game. Then you can play as your NFT, which is pretty cool. It's a relatively basic game, but it's still pretty fun, side-scrolling 2D smasher. But then within the game, you're also creating, you're getting their own token. So they have a governance token, the NFTL token, for example. So this is another kind of common use case. And I actually think it's a little bit more fun, definitely, when compared to like Axie Infinity. I think that the utility is obvious, right? So you buy the piece and now you can play the game with a big community. Like in this case, there's 10,000 of these items. So it's limited to 10,000 people playing this game. But within that, there's a whole ecosystem that builds itself up, right? And most importantly, the game itself is actually really fun. Another really cool one that I've ran into recently was called Mafagafo, and they are out of Brazil, actually. And what they've done is they've done a similar thing to Nifty League, where you buy their little bird NFT, and once you own one, you can get access to the game. And the game is basically Fall Guys, if you're familiar with Fall Guys. And essentially, it's kind of a rip of Fall Guys, but it's fun because everyone knows the game Fall Guys, right? So once you have access, same thing. You go in and you can play and you can earn currencies that you can actually then sell and trade. And so that's a kind of cool use case that I've seen, where basically you own that first NFT and you get access to a game that's genuinely fun, and that only the community of NFT owners can get access to that game. So that's another pretty cool use case that I've been seeing. And a third one that I think is the most kind of interesting, but also furthest away from being live, is like really ambitious NFT ecosystem games, right? So one is the Star Atlas, for example, which is going to be built on the Solana blockchain. And again, it's very high fidelity. I believe they're building this one on Unreal with Unreal Engine. So really high quality kind of assets. And you're essentially going to be like a spacefaring civilization, right? So not only do you buy the initial avatar and maybe even your spaceship as your NFTs to kind of get access to the game, but then once you're in the game, you can mine, you can go travel the galaxies and build up your kind of store of digital assets that you can then turn around and sell, or they'll have different in-game utility. So this is a really cool avenue where basically I think of it as like a Mass Effect kind of game, where you're really traveling to different solar systems and doing all the cool fun stuff that already exists in some video games, but actually being able to have all of the assets that you're accruing in your own sovereign wallet that you can then trade with others within the ecosystem, and the value just kind of builds on itself. And the people who put in the time to really go around and search and find the cool resources without paying for it can turn around and sell it to the people who maybe don't have the time to go search the galaxies and find those resources, so they'll pay someone for it. So this is kind of the potential for gaming ecosystems, the financial ecosystems that can live within Web3 games that we are not seeing yet, but we see the kind of seeds of it, right? And so whether it's Star Atlas, another one is Sidus Heroes, which again, still very far from kind of being fully alive and working, but a very ambitious and cool game, again, traveling the galaxy, finding resources, all that fun stuff. So those are kind of the three main things, that I've seen. One is kind of farming, really economic, not really the most fun games. Two, really cool kind of 2D side-scrolling basic games that you get access to with the NFT. And three, kind of long-term, big galaxy metaverse build-out concepts that you can buy into now, but likely won't be able to actually experience and have fun in for maybe another 2 years or so, depending on what their roadmap is, right? And then the fourth one I just want to mention that we always mention on this show is the Metaverse, which of course is a massive expansion of digital space, whether it's the sandbox, whether Somnium space, voxels is one that we often jump into and look at a lot in this space. And what I've seen with the Metaverse is more and more NFT collections, like this Dreamers collection, for example, that's built by Bitlectro Labs. They actually have wearables for the metaverse, or even a full metaverse avatar of the NFT you purchase that they'll just airdrop to you when you have the NFT. So there's all kinds of utility that can be brought into the metaverse. And as many people who have listened to this show probably know already, the metaverse is a limitless kind of expanse of digital space that exists in different corners, whether it's, like I said, the Sandbox, Somnium Space, Crypto Voxels, Decentraland. There are many more that are going to be popping up. So it's another whole other kind of side of the gaming, but I would say it's less video game and more just open space kind of sandbox to build, right? So those are the real broad categories of Web3 gaming that I see right now. And I'm excited about 3 out of 4 of them. The Axie Infinity thing's not really that interesting to me, but definitely those other 3 sections I think are really just kind of getting started. And so it's really exciting to see where it's going. And it'd be really interesting to get Neeraj's perspective on all of this, because he is building, he's on the ground, helping developers actually bring Web3 games to life. So without further ado, Neeraj, maybe before you tell us a bit about what Moonstream.to does, share a little bit about your background, what brings you to Web3, the blockchain, and why are you so, such a believer in Web3 gaming? So welcome.
Thanks. So the reason I believe in Web3 games is that, first of all, I believe in games. I think the most meaningful relationships I've built in my life are built around games, not necessarily video games. I play, games like Go, backgammon, chess. I play a lot of video games as well, computer games mostly. I play PC games. I'm not
Nice.
like a computer
Yeah, I
guy.
play a little PC games too.
My favorite games, like for example, I play a lot of StarCraft 2 even now, 12 years after its release,
Nice.
online, these kinds of things. Um, so I like games a lot, first of all, and I really believe in the importance of games culturally, which is why I can seriously and professionally work on games. My background is that I started my life as a mathematician, and I sort of got involved into tech through an interest in healthcare. I was building algorithms that help diagnose Parkinson's disease and dementias and other disorders of that nature. Um, and that got me into technology to get started with. I was more interested in building things that people would interact with. When you're doing academic mathematics, I was doing mathematical research. There's maybe like 5 to 10 other people in the world max that care about what you're doing, and the work that you're doing generally has very little relevance to anyone around you, like in the real world. At some point, I just got really sick of that, for personal reasons. My grandmother was very ill, and I realized I'd rather be building things that help people like her than to be doing this very like
Yeah,
academic
you want to be
academic.
more rewarding, right?
Yeah, and it has been a lot more rewarding, but that's what got me into tech in the first place. And I came in because I was designing those algorithms more in uh, doing data science and artificial intelligence related work. And I'd always been sort of interested in crypto because when you're in mathematical circles, you're at least familiar with the mathematical concepts behind Bitcoin and stuff like that. The Bitcoin white paper made its rounds in
Right.
the math community, when it was released. So I'd always been interested, sort of, as a purchaser, and I wasn't trading. I just hold, right. Since very early, and but I really Ethereum excited me. I sort of became exposed to Ethereum in 2015, 2015, early 2016, and at that time Ethereum was being sort of billed as the world computer, right? And that really excited me, and that's what got me building in the space. I started out, on infrastructure, running nodes and stuff like that,
Wow.
and then gradually sort of moved my way up the stack. At the time, I worked at Google, and I realized that I didn't want to waste my life working at Google, and I'd much rather, where I would never have a chance to, meaningfully contribute to this movement that I really believe in towards decentralization and technology. And so I left that job. I worked for a while at a startup where I was running the blockchain team at a company called Doc AI, and then the 2018 crash happened, and they sort of moved away from crypto, and I just left to start my own company, and that's Moonstream. That's what
Wow.
you mentioned sovereignty a lot in the intro, and that's something that I very, very strongly believe in self-sovereignty. At Moonstream, we run all of our own infrastructure for all of the blockchains we support. We run our own nodes on those blockchains that we collect data from. And basically, what we're doing is we build economic infrastructure for Web3 games because you mentioned four categories of games. I have a fifth category of game that I think is quite important. But for
Yeah.
any category of games that operate on the blockchain, um, it's the hardest, the most difficult thing for them to really understand, and the most important thing for them to really understand is that all of a sudden now, once their game becomes a blockchain game, their game economy is no longer just a game economy. Their game economy is a real economy, and everything that they do ultimately connects down to their game economy. And this is something that the successful blockchain games sort of very quickly understand very well, and they need tools to manage that economy, and Moonstream basically provides them tools to
Wow,
manage.
that's such an important point, right? So the in-game economy once on the blockchain is not just an in-game economy. It then becomes true economic value, right? And that is a big difference. And I can see how maybe your traditional game developer spaces, that might be reason enough to be like, I'm not interested. Like, why mess with what we have, right? Because they can keep everything in-house within their game, and like you said, not be concerned about maybe the creative or financial sovereignty of their gamers or their developers, frankly. So yeah, that's really exciting. So it sounds like you're really a true OG then. So the math brought you into Bitcoin, and then the math kept you in and on the blockchain, and then you heard about Ethereum from the initial kind of launch, and you've been building out with them since then. And even in 2018, when the crash happened, you weren't one of those who ran away. You kept heads down and kept building, eh?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So here we are potentially in another crash, right? How do you feel about
potentially, definitely in another crash.
Right.
Especially for games, it's kind of a brutal market right now. But I see what other people are doing. Ultimately, what happens is it's interesting. It's interesting with what's going on in the markets is that sort of the hype reaches more and more people during the bull run, in every subsequent crash that happened in 2013 with Mt. Gox, the Magic the Gathering server that became a crypto exchange, happened in 2017 with tokens, with the RC20 tokens. It happened in the previous bull run that was mostly powered by DeFi. The hype reaches more and more people, and you get these sort of bubble dynamics, but with every wave of people that are entering the blockchain, okay, there's going to be some very, very large percentage of them that are just in it for the money, but it's also bringing more builders on and more really novel ideas and deep ideas that can sort of be realized through the technology that we're talking about, right? Through blockchain technology. And so the number of meaningful projects that are currently being built is just increasing at a very encouraging rate. And we're going to see these kinds of market cycles again and again, and especially because this is an unregulated market, or it's not a very strongly regulated
not
market.
As heavily regulated, right?
Yeah,
the US is trying, and the EU's trying too. They're coming.
But on any real blockchain, on any really decentralized blockchain, good luck to them, right?
Right, exactly, yeah.
So.
And when you look at that really decentralized blockchain, are you of the mind that kind of Ethereum and Bitcoin obviously are kind of the kings in that discussion, or do you think that Solana and Tezos and maybe a couple others are sufficiently decentralized to avoid?
I don't think Solana is sufficiently decentralized.
No.
Tezos might be. I'm not familiar with the statistics there of who's running nodes and stuff like that. I would need to do research on that. Most blockchains are not sufficiently decentralized, especially the ones that are trying to, decentralization comes at a cost.
Mm-hmm.
On Ethereum, the cost is the transaction latency,
the gas price,
wait for a transaction to get mined, and the block rate and so on. So usually you can tell the more decentralized blockchains are harder to use. Basically, unfortunately, that's the state of the technology right now. And usually people sacrifice decentralization to improve user experience, as Solana does, right?
Essentially, yeah. And so when you look at Solana, I know, especially when just over the last year, I guess, I've heard this argument that they work better with Rust and with Unreal Engine. And for that reason, maybe some of the more high fidelity games will function better on Solana than they would on Ethereum. Do you think there's any validity to that? And yeah,
I mean, that's probably what the Star Atlas developers are saying. I don't know.
Yeah, that might have been where I heard it.
Yeah, that's probably like the I don't know. They're building a lot in that ecosystem. I think they're building a lot of like deep technology in that ecosystem, and they're making that investment, right? I mean, I have nothing bad to say about the Star Atlas team because they're putting their money where their mouth is, and they're actually like building in that space. But I'll tell you. So let's actually get into what you said at the beginning, right? With the four categories of games.
Right.
For me, the most interesting thing about blockchain games actually is about putting agency back in the hands of the player community. So I just wanted like, have you ever played World of Warcraft, David?
Yeah, I'm familiar.
Okay,
I played a little bit.
Yeah, so let's just do a thought experiment with World of Warcraft. So World of Warcraft is a game. It's run by Blizzard. Blizzard creates the content for that game. Blizzard maintains the servers for that game. Blizzard makes it possible for people to play that game, and they get quite a bit of credit for doing so, and they make quite a bit of money for doing so. I think they're in like tens of millions of monthly active users. Like, a lot of people play WoW.
Yep.
Blizzard has sort of profited wildly off of building a very good and very successful. I personally don't like World of Warcraft, but like I know it's an addictive game for a lot of people, right? So and it's a fun game it's also a fun game for a lot of people.
That's most important, right? Exactly.
Very meaningful, social like communities through World of Warcraft, like guilds in World of Warcraft, like those are communities that exist like even independently of Blizzard, right? Those are the kinds of communities that, for example, made Discord successful, and like like those communities have an existence sort of their own independently of the game, but they wouldn't have existed without the game World of Warcraft. So that's a very important thing. Now, in games like World of Warcraft, let's say that you're a player in World of Warcraft, you are bringing value to the rest of the community just by playing the game, just by participating in the game. You are actually bringing value to the rest of the community, but you're not treated that way, and you don't have agency in that sense, right? Like Blizzard, it would be completely up to them to listen to like what suggestions players had for like features that they should add in the game, or quests that they should add in the game, or the lore of the game universe, or anything like that. That's completely at the mercy of Blizzard. As a player, you don't really have much agency to define what happens in the world around you in World of Warcraft. And you definitely don't see any monetary reward or you don't have any monetary upside for the value that you bring to the game. If you had like a World of Warcraft server that only had like, let's say 50 people on it or 100 people on it that were like, consistently playing on it, it probably wouldn't be a very entertaining server.
Right.
And most people would prefer to play on a server that had like, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of players, right? But each of the players that are on the populated server, they don't really see any benefit of like bringing that value to the server itself and to the game itself. If this is like the cold start problem for like most massively multiplayer games, how do they actually solve this cold start problem? In Web3, I think the philosophy needs to be very different, and the successful Web3 games, I agree with you. There are very few Web3 games that are actually fun to play right now. I think we've only ever had fun playing one Web3 game as a team so far.
Wow. You probably shouldn't admit that on recording.
Oh, no. I think it's perfectly fine, because everybody who's building Web3 games actually understands this. And everybody who's building Web3 games is like really quite focused on actually bringing the fun to players. This is not something that people don't understand, and it's a problem that people are very actively trying to solve, especially now that we're in a bear market where just irrational optimism about like tokens isn't going to
right
keep a game running.
I think now now you're up against the opposite problem of irrational pessimism.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So player communities, for me, are at the heart of Web3, of Web3 gaming especially, and figuring out how to build games in a way that's directed by the player communities, that's the most important thing. And all of the games that you mentioned, David, do not attempt to do that. All of the games that you mentioned, they have one developer, one company that's building the game, and then they have a community of players that's supposed to consume the game. Okay, that's sort of like the way that wave of games works on Web3. I think personally that if these games could be quite successful, by the way, I'm not saying that they will not be successful, but in order to unleash the potential, like really realize the potential of like, building a game on Web3, I think the architecture will be very different. It won't be like one company that's building a game, like, for a community of players to consume. I think it'll be a community of players that sort of gather around an idea and that fund and that drive. The players themselves will be building it, they'll be funding it, they'll be doing whatever. They'll sort of like drive the creation of a game experience that they want to participate in. We're sort of seeing hints of this already with a few projects. So the projects that like I sort of keep in mind for this kind of behavior are, and just upfront, I don't own tokens in any of these projects, so I can like speak in an unbiased way about these things. They're like darkforest.eth is one of them. Forgotten Runes Wizards Cult is a very prominent project, which actually has the potential to become like a very successful Web3 gaming community. The Loot Project, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but they've been quite inspirational to us.
Sorry, which one was the last one? I know Forgotten Runes for sure.
Yeah, the Loot Project.
Loot, familiar with Loot.
Yeah, and then the game that we've had fun playing is Conquest.eth, which is sort of like a space diplomacy game. And then there's Ethermore. That's another one where it's people who are building, like trying to build an engaging world as a community rather than as like individual game devs or something like that, as like a single company that's building an experience for their players. Those are the projects that like, and it's very early days for most of them. Well, Forgotten Runes Wizards Cult is the exception. There's a lot of like hype and a lot of money behind it and so on. But for the other projects, they're much smaller. The Loot did pretty well last year, but
I remember them having a big splash at some point.
And then the noise died down over time. But there's people who are building like really meaningful stuff in that ecosystem. Those are the ones that I'm the most excited about. And the way that like, people will think about building those games is going to change quite a bit as well, where it's not going to be like, here's one game that you download and that's the experience that you play. It's rather going to be, here's a game universe and anybody in the community can build game experiences for the players in this universe. And the player community basically, votes with its attention on which game experiences are fun and which game experiences are not fun. And the people who are building those experiences are rewarded proportionately to the value that they bring to the community. And, then you're going to see something where like, what is the annual revenue of something like World of Warcraft or League of Legends? It's measured if at the outset, like, at the maximum, probably the billions of dollars annually. I think if you sort of allow for this kind of behavior where the player community has ownership over the game universe and the player community has agency on like what experiences they get to participate in, you'll unlock economies worth like tens or hundreds or even like hundreds of billions of dollars or even trillions of dollars. Like these are real economies that we're talking about, and if you allow people to like sort of have productive roles in those economies and to be rewarded for it, then we're not talking about games anymore. We're talking about the same kinds of dynamics that you see in religions or nations, right? Like those are the kinds of
true collaboration, I guess, is the real key. Is the added secret sauce maybe of Web3 games. It's good that you brought up Forgotten Runes. I kind of forgot about the gaming angle of it, even though that's a huge part of the whole project, right? And they did have our friend Rami, who's president of the Dream Conduit. I believe he still has one of these wizards. And when we were in New York, we went to an event with theirs and I actually got this comic book that's on their site, the Forgotten Runes comic. And I believe, like you said, it was kind of built out, the lore was built out with input from the community in their community Discord. And they actually rewarded people who wrote the best lore, I believe, like with NFT or with having their lore featured in the video game. Then like you say, even building out these video games where, like I had mentioned in one of my categories there, the kind of more basic 2D ones where you play as your NFT, they definitely have that happening already here, where your character NFTs are playable in the game, and it's a little kind of 2D fighting game that they got there. It looks really cool. So right now I think that's actually the most effective use case right now, is like relatively not too heavy games, especially if it's on Ethereum, right? Because I think it is still a big limitation building heavy games on Ethereum. But
I
definitely,
wouldn't build games on Ethereum, but you can build on L2s. You can
that's
build
what I
on.
meant. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a fair, good distinction maybe for our audience. So building directly on Ethereum is never a good thing, but you can build on a layer 2 or even a roll up, right? That basically allows for 0 to very low gas fees and transaction fees. So maybe you want to speak a little bit about how you see the blockchain mechanics evolving. So looking at Forgotten Runes and how they kind of are activating their community. How do you see that balance between basically having to choose the right blockchain, but actually allowing your community to also guide? Like, doesn't there have to be kind of a central development body, even if it can take a little bit of input from the community, but there always has to be kind of a group that really knows the dev side, right? Like gamers, I would say, what's the percentage of gamers who truly want to know the dev side and who do know the dev side, right? Do you think that's a balancing act? Like, how do you see that evolving? Because it sounds like you're kind of wanting gamers to take a bit more involvement in the dev side, right? And
I mean, it's not like sort of, of course, it's not going to be like the majority of people who are playing a game who have that development, the ability to develop in that game. Although there are games like Dark Forest Hadith where probably right now that game is only fun for programmers and mostly programmers play that game and they're building really great things, really great tools for the community and stuff like that as they play the game. So that's happening in Dark Forest Hadith, but I think that speaks more to the inaccessibility of that game to like the general public.
But to your point, maybe that doesn't matter right now. Maybe they let it be inaccessible and build a really cool game, and then once it's built, they'll be like, "Hey, look at our cool game we built."
I think by default, a game that's inaccessible is not a really cool game. So really, you have to be looking for the fun. Like, how is this game going to be fun for like the maximum number of people, not just something that like nerds, and I count myself like deep nerds enjoy doing, right? Like it has to be something that like a lot of people enjoy doing. But the thing is, if you build a game that's fun, you're going to attract people. And if you let's say that I built a game that was like super fun right now, right? Like just amazingly fun. And I said, hey, we're opening this up so the community can build like, additional experiences for the players. We're not putting a moat around our users, right? So the biggest difference between like a Web3 game and like a regular game, let's say like a computer game or a video game that existed like before Web3, or that doesn't use Web3, is that those games, the like mobile games and World of Warcraft and all of those guys, they have a moat around their user base, right? Only they know who the players are, and they're like gonna guard that information with their lives, and that's the way that they make their money, right? Those games make money off of their players, okay?
Right.
In Web3, there is no moat. Right now, there is no moat around your player community. Literally, if I were interested in understanding what the player community were for like any particular game, I could literally go and look at the transactions that were happening around that game on the blockchain, and I would have a list at least of the addresses of the players that were interacting with their game, right? They're like Web3 addresses, or their Ethereum account addresses, or Solana addresses, or whatever, right? So you don't have a moat. This means that like you cannot, if your business strategy requires you to make money off of your players, basically by exploiting them, it's not going to work because that information is publicly available and anybody can make use of it. Okay.
Right.
So the way that you need to make money as a Web3 game, the only way to make money is to genuinely create value for your player community. So basically like, over here you have a business model that exploits its player community in order to make money, essentially. Okay, I mean they're not necessarily like malicious about it, but like they're making money off of their players. And in Web3 games, you're making money by creating value for your players. So that's like the most fundamental distinction between Web3 games and non-Web3 games. So if you have this kind of a mentality, and you say, we're willing to build together with our community, or like, it's not even we, there's no we, right? There is the community. The community wants to build this experience. People who have a penchant for building, people who enjoy building, they're more likely to join your community. And already with these games, right? Like think about like Defense of the Ancients. It was a Warcraft 3 mod. It wasn't built by Blizzard. It was built by like a random programmer that enjoyed playing Warcraft 3 that had a great idea for like, a game experience, and he built Dota, right? And there were 2 rounds of maintainers of Dota. Dota went through rounds of maintainers before the guy who got hired by Valve to build Dota 2. The first two maintainers of Dota basically saw, I don't think they saw any upside from like the effort that they put into like,
What? That's
maintaining
wild.
that game. Yeah. But they did. They built it anyway, right? They built
Mhm.
it because they wanted to build it. Like I think there's like this I think most of the world doesn't understand why the people who build things build things. Why do builders build things?
Mm.
It's just um, and that's okay. But the point is like if your community just says we're open to like allowing people to build for us in this very transparent way, you will get more people who are willing to like build more things and more interesting things than we've seen in gaming before, and we've already seen a lot of great things in gaming before that were built like sort of completely independently like of any studio or any developer or any publisher that turned into phenomenons like Dota, like MOBA games, right? MOBA games
Yeah.
all came out of Dota, and that was just built by like some guy that was really passionate about like making that game experience a reality.
Yeah.
um and there was a very vibrant mod community for Warcraft 3, and there's a very vibrant mod community for StarCraft 2, and for a lot of games, right? Like this was, uh, uh, I'm not worried about like the access to people who are building things. And when I say building things, it doesn't just have to be like programming. You need people who are like going to be creating lore collectively. So like writers, you need people who are artists, right? Who are like going to be sort of visualizing the world. You need musicians, you need people who are like going to create the sounds of the
Yeah.
it's not just about programming. And in Web3, all of those people can participate in the communities and sort of see a proportionate reward for the value that they create in their community.
Exactly, no doubt. And it's about creating value with your community and that you
Yeah,
happen to benefit from, right? And then the
exactly.
abundance kind of spreads around a little bit more, right? You got a little bit more
Exactly.
avenues for value from the gamers themselves to be able to take part and enjoy. Yeah, it's really interesting. But when you look at some of these traditional structures, right? Like, for example, a World of Warcraft, um, or maybe it might be easier with those mobile games, but how do you see crypto? Do you think that it's a scenario where you could add a crypto component or a Web3 component to an already existing game and still bring in that kind of community value? Or is it a scenario where you kind of do have to build it for that reason, like kind of from the ground up? Like, for example, if World of Warcraft, I know it's probably a bad example, but if they're like in-game currency, all of a sudden, they were able to integrate like a certain token for very special purchases that you can then off-ramp, and actually have it in your, Ethereum wallet or whatever the crypto wallet might be. Do you see a future where that's actually possible, like where games that maybe already exist realize the value in creating this kind of value for their community and they add like a Web3 crypto component to an already existing game?
I definitely see the possibility of that, but let me tell you why it's difficult. Okay,
Mm.
it's because let's take World of Warcraft as the example. Okay, it's been running for what, like over 17 years now, right? Maybe close to 20 years now, right? World of Warcraft has been running for like close to 20 years at this
Wow.
point. Um, they like the game designers for World of Warcraft, like balance is an important thing, right? Like the first thing that you care about as a game designer is that the experience should be fun, and then the second thing that you care about is that the experience should be balanced. And especially in a multiplayer game, balance is how you sort of guarantee fun across the entire player base, right? Like it needs to be well balanced.
That makes sense.
In a game like World of Warcraft, the game designers, in a non Web3 game, it's very natural for game designers to use the economy as like a very hard control on game balance, right? Like you can actually, if you have like, let's say that you're sitting in a game economy like the World of Warcraft game economy, and you had like explicit control over like the drop rate of certain types of items or something like that. Um, you could actually affect the balance of the game by making like overpowered items more rare, or so something like this, right?
Mm.
You could actually like, you don't have to like actually change the rules of the game. You can change like the parameters of the economy in order to like
Right.
improve the
Like
balance
the
of the game.
rarity of certain items
Yeah.
and things like
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have like very direct control as a game designer for like a non Web3 game. If you're running a Web3 game, now all of a sudden your game economy, right? So like that was our first axiom, right? Your game economy is a real economy.
Is a real
That
economy. Yeah.
means that you can no longer, like as a single game designer, right, at Blizzard or Activision or Microsoft, whatever company owns that game now, right? You can't go in anymore and just say, hey, I'm gonna like just change this rarity because I want to improve the game balance. Because when you do that, that's actually gonna have very real financial implications for like a large number of people in your player base. And
Right.
let's say that you ruin, like, let's say you financially ruin even like 0.1% of your player base. That's not a good look for your economy. That could have like side effects, that could have like downstream effects
Mm.
that could just wreck your entire economy. You don't want something like that to happen, right? You don't want to have that kind of very explicit control. That's why Moonstream exists, right? We build the tools that allow you to sort of uh, softly control your economy, then do these kinds of hard controls where I'm just gonna like drop the rarity and stuff like that. Okay,
Right.
so uh, for a game like World of Warcraft, where they have almost 2 decades operating in a certain way, like with the game economy, it's going to be really hard to integrate with Web3 because almost certainly like the Web3 way of operating an economy is going to like conflict with their way of
Clash
operating an
with it. Yeah.
economy. So, yeah, exactly,
Okay.
exactly. So it's possible, but for an established game, for like a game for an economy that's been running for a long time off of Web3, it's going to be difficult. It's not impossible. It's just going to be difficult, right?
Yeah.
It's much easier, for example, for them to say, we're going to just spin up this entire new instance of WoW, right? This entire new like flavor of WoW
Right.
explicitly for this community. Let's say that like World of Warcraft guys said, hey, we love Star Atlas. We want to build like a Star Atlas themed like flavor of WoW. They could do that, and then that's starting with a fresh economy. It would be a lot easier to integrate into the Star Atlas economy
Okay.
than
Yeah, that makes sense. So what you'll have is possibly the real economy of a Web3 game clashing against the in-game economy, which is much more flexible. And like you say, the variables are kind of controlled by the central body, whereas we
yeah.
can't have that in Web3 because it needs to be very accountable, clear, and everyone's kind of understands, what we're working with as an
Yeah,
ecosystem.
actually, in Web
Right.
three, you need to think like a central bank, right? Like in Web three, you need to think Federal Reserve, basically. Like in a non Web three game, you can just think like, right? Like, oh, I'm just gonna like change like how this entire aspect of my economy behaves. But in Web three, if you're like, even if it's a somewhat centralized game, which is fine, like you can have Web three games that are centralized that
Of
have like
course,
a
yeah.
governing body or something like that. They need to think like the Federal Reserve, basically, about their economy. So that
Yeah.
and that that's the kind of tooling we build that help them to enact their monetary and fiscal policies in their economy, because that's a very important thing. Because already, even at this early stage, we're talking about economies that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars, right? These are not small
Yeah,
economies
it's
that
wild.
can operate. Yeah, yeah,
And so
yeah,
looking at some of your options on your site here at Moonstream, like, yeah, I can see how just being able to kind of simplify those on-chain mechanics, the on-chain data, the analytics that allow you to say, this is your game economy, but it
yeah,
has real world economy or economic implications, right? So looking at these, you talk about loot boxes, creating crafting recipes, deploying
yeah.
mini games, managing the airdrops. Those all sound like pretty important elements. When you look at something like deploying mini games, for example, is this a scenario where you could potentially have like a metaverse space and then you just want to activate like this one little corner where you ask your community to come
Exactly.
play this game, and maybe when you play the game you get like whatever our community token is, or you could probably make it even Ethereum, right, to make it maybe a
Exactly.
little bit more valuable.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Actually, we ran an event like that. One of the games that we participate in is called Crypto Unicorns. It's on the Polygon blockchain. And earlier this year, so from the end of January to the end of March, we actually ran a mini game event in Crypto Unicorns. That was the first mini game, the first two mini game mechanics that we built were actually run over there. It was huge. The game development team for Crypto Unicorns, they actually used that as a way to like distribute their utility token. So the first distribution of their utility token to their player community was done through our mini game. Before our mini game launched, this token didn't have any value. It didn't exist even, right? There were
Wow.
exactly zero tokens, zero like of those tokens in circulation before our mini game existed. And after our mini game launched, on launch, this is not something that we can fully claim credit for because it also tied into their game, and
Of
their
course.
game designers thought a lot about how it affected the economies. But on launch, like the supply of their utility token inside our mini game was instantly worth $40 million, right? And the value kept on increasing, like over the period that we were running the game.
Wow.
Um, and we thought this would be a mini game where like maybe like 5%, maximum 10% of their players like were participating. But at the peak, I mean, basically over 92% of all of their NFTs went through our mini game during the 2 months that we ran it, which was like beyond our wildest expectations. And a it was scary too, because the value locked into our contract, our mini games are all on-chain mini. So overnight, like the value locked into our contract went from like 0 to 40 million to $800 million,
Wow.
and people were attacking our contract. That was like a very stressful 2 months, right? Because we were running security operations, making sure that nobody could exploit the contract and stuff like that. It was an exciting and stressful time. I have to say it was, but it shows you the potential, like how you can actually generate value inside an economy by running events like that. Everything becomes economic when you're talking about Web3 games. Everything sort of relates to your game economy, and you have to be really creative about how you bring value into mini games are one way of doing that. Another way that we're doing that is we're also starting to spin up like the creation of lore, and we're building tools that make it easy for a communities to sort of agree on what the canon is for a game universe, right? Because
Mm.
everyone's going to have different ideas like of what the lore should be for the game, and ultimately the entire player unit community needs to come to some sort of consensus on like what the canonical lore is for the universe. And so we're also sort of like building tools that make that kind of
That's really cool. Wow, that's awesome.
yeah.
So looking at like how you kind of plug into an existing project, if it's a scenario where let's say a project is creating NFTs and wants to have a gaming element kind of added to the project, but doesn't have kind of the gaming experience on their board or on their project team, is it a scenario where they can go to moonstream.to and kind of one-stop shop, like what are our best gaming options, how can we add a gaming component to this NFT, and your team essentially works with projects to bring to life some gaming component?
That's right. Usually the project participation is very important there because they understand their player community and their universe the best.
Of course.
But yeah, anybody can deploy our contract. So we build completely in the open. All the software that we write is completely open source. They can deploy it themselves, or they can talk to us if they want to, like, sort of like, it's usually pretty hard for people to do this stuff on Web3.
Right.
So the natural starting point for them is they just reach out to me over Discord or something like that, and then we sort of like help them out. But yeah, they can deploy their own games. As I said, we're building the economic infrastructure. So like on our side, it's mostly like smart contracts and like the backends that sort of make it easy to run the games.
Mm.
And then the games themselves usually build the front ends, the like experience for their player community that's like the most immediate to their player community. That's like mindful of the aesthetics of the game and stuff like, and the
Right.
sort of lore of the game universe and stuff like that to present to them.
Cool. Yeah, no, because like I'm in contact. Obviously, I run this show, and I'm dealing with or working with a couple different DAOs. One of them is the Storytime DAO that's just kind of starting out, and it's kind of exciting what we're trying to build. Just putting stories on the blockchain and really creating different projects around literature essentially. But we do want to have a gaming element as well, and we already have like a lot in crypto voxels, right? So I'm like imagining a scenario where, let's say there's a little arcade machine right in the corner of our lot in crypto voxels, and our community knows what we're about. We have these different stories and that, and maybe that arcade is a really simple mini game that actually uses elements from the community, whether it's names, characters, but it's a game that maybe already exists. It doesn't have to be remaking the wheel or anything. So we could come to you and kind of just say, hey, this is the community we're working with. This is the space we have in voxels. How do you think we should build a mini game for our community? And we could just have that conversation, go from there.
Yeah, that's exactly how it works. And yeah, I would be happy to talk.
Right,
I think you're in our Discord, so yeah, just send me a message.
No doubt. We're having this conversation on Discord right now.
yeah, exactly.
For sure. I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on Axie Infinity? Because I'm kind of critical of the mechanic, like the way that it works, right? Like the scenario where essentially you have people who are maybe a little more well-financed buying the actual Axies and then kind of like renting them or leasing them out to poorer people to do like really I wouldn't say arduous because it's still on a computer, but but maybe boring or mundane tasks,
Yeah, very
to
tedious
try to
tasks, yeah.
farm and increase the value. I feel like there's a lot of very legitimate criticisms of that kind of Web3 game. And when I look at a lot of the FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt from the gamer space, which is huge, unfortunately. Like, I'm out here trying to bang the drum and be like, gamers, pay attention to the blockchain. Let's build some cool stuff over here. And a lot of them are listening to the FUD. So I feel like Axie is kind of at least partially responsible for a lot of that FUD. What are your thoughts on it? And is there a right way to do a game like that? Or are they just always going to kind of fall to this type of system?
So I don't personally like that style of game. Similarly to you, I just don't like that style of game. I wouldn't play that game if it wasn't a Web3 game. I definitely won't play that game just because it's a Web3. Okay, so that's
Right.
that's my basic position on that. I think Axie has been extremely important though, because a lot of really important ideas have come from the Axie community. For example, the notion of guilds. Love them or hate them, guilds, the way that they exist in Web3 came out of the Axie community. Okay, and
Okay.
that so historically, Axie has been extremely important, and I don't think they're going to go anywhere anytime soon. They're just too well capitalized, and
Right.
I think they've sort of pivoted to focus on the fun. They're building a non-Web3 version of Axie. They're find the fun in the game. At some point, elements from that will probably go back into the Web3 Axie and stuff like this. I mean, that's a team that's a smart team. Okay, that's a team that actually understands games pretty well,
Mm.
and they're just too well capitalized to just write them off completely.
Yeah.
But I don't like Axie. Okay, and I think the way that I see it, the problem with the game mechanics of Axie is that it is pay to win, because the Axie team had a mobile gaming background, right? They were building mobile games before they built Axie.
Right.
And that's the way that mobile games monetize, is right. They monetize through whales. I realized, I just learned that there's whales and there's dolphins, based on how much money people spend on the game, and you monetize by basically making money off of the players who are willing to spend a lot of money on it, right?
Yeah.
The problem is that, and I think the right way for a Web3 game to think about it is that people shouldn't be able to how effective someone's characters are in a game shouldn't be determined, and the value of their characters in the game shouldn't be determined by how much money they spent on the game, right? In
Mm.
Axie, it's indirect, right? Because there's randomness involved when you roll an Axie,
Right.
or when you create an Axie. And if you're able to create Axies at a large scale, you're going to get at some point very effective Axies. It's just law
Mm-hmm.
of large numbers, right? But I think the way it needs to work is that the skill of the player. So if a player is skilled at the game, that improves the value of their characters in the game, and that's the way that they sort of realize the value of them developing that skill, where a skilled player could level up characters inside the game and then sell them on open and go back to leveling.
Mm.
And in a game in which you need it to be skilled, the problem with Axie is that it's tedious, right? You don't need to be skilled, it's open
Right.
to anyone. But if you needed to build skills in the game, then I think by default the game would be a lot more fun than just some sort of a grind of just
Yeah,
earning
that's
XP,
kind of
earning
the
tokens.
concern. But you raised
Yeah.
some good points about Axie's kind of provenance and what they've brought to the space. I mean, as far as guilds, like you said earlier, when looking at StarCraft, World of Warcraft, that's kind of the real origins of that guild structure, right? But in a
But Web3 guilds are, yeah,
Web3
Web3
guilds are,
guilds are a different beast entirely.
they
Yeah,
are a different beast,
yeah,
hey, yeah. And it's a
yeah,
lot of courting whales, isn't it? And kind of
yeah,
gamer whales, essentially. And
yeah.
even when I look at, I think Star Atlas, you could make that criticism of, or Sidus NFT Heroes, where there was kind of a randomness at mint. But then, right after mint, all the rare ones, if you have the money, you can buy the rare ones and you're going to perform better in the game, right? At
Yeah.
least on the Sidus side. I don't know if Star Atlas is kind of similar. But so what do you think about that? Or even looking at what you just mentioned with the skilled players being able to increase the value of their in-game avatar or character. Ultimately, though, you would need a whale to see the value in that and purchase it, right? In order for it to actually realize that value, don't you think?
I don't think that's true. I don't
Okay.
think you need to see a whale. I think you just need to see a large number of engaged players. I really think that
Mm.
Web3 dynamics are very different. And I can tell you, for example, the way that mints work is you have some limited number of NFTs. You have a high buy-in to play the game. You mentioned a game at the beginning. You said they have 10,000. I think it was Smash Brothers one, where they have
Yeah, that was
10,000.
a nifty league. Yeah.
Yeah. Why would you go through all the trouble of building a game and then say that only 10,000 people can play this game? That fundamentally doesn't make sense to me, because I build things, and when I build things for other people to use, I
Mm.
don't want to artificially limit the number of people that can play my game, right? So I think there's a lot of broken things in in NFT land that are sort of like polluting Web3 games, and I think they'll sort of go away over time. One of them is, I think, if you're building a Web3 game, if anybody out there is building a Web3 game, consider this: just make the NFTs free to mint. Loot did this, and it worked out very well for them, because right now the way that NFT marketplaces work is that you generate a lot of secondary revenues, and so if you have a free mint, you open up your game to like a lot more people up front. You make it accessible to a lot more people
That
up
makes
front.
sense.
If you built a great game, if you built like a great game universe, people are going to be trading your game characters, or going to be trading items from your game, and you're going to get those revenues. That's another way to monetize that you really should not ignore. Okay, so you don't get a lot of money up front, but if you're really dedicated to building a great game, then you can generate a lot of revenue over time from the secondary markets. And then the second thing is like, yeah, randomness. Why not like mint a lot of characters up front where the randomness doesn't affect too much of like, game. It can affect superficial things like, the skins of the characters and stuff like
Yeah.
that. Don't let it affect the game mechanics, and build a game in which the amount of time and the amount of effort and the amount of skill that players put into a character determine the value of that character in the long term.
Right.
And that way, that incentivizes players to get good at your game, not just like grind it out on like, whatever 50 mobile screens or whatever, like, the things.
Yeah.
Like it actually incentivizes them to get good at the game, and the more time that they spend in an actively thinking about your game, the more they're going to be engaged in your lore, in the game universe, the more connections they're going to form in the player community, where they exchange tips on how to get good at the game. The more guides they're going to write, like just the more sort of immersive and engaging content your player community is going to create about your game. I think that's the way to really think about things. But it requires you to sort of buck the trend that you're seeing with like, that came from NFTs, right?
And
From
maybe
like
be okay with not getting that huge influx
Yeah.
of cash right up front, or liquidity.
Well, very few people are getting a huge influx right now.
Well, right
so
now
this
that's
is
not going to
gonna be a
happen. Yeah,
trend.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll be real lucky if you manage to pull that off. So that's an interesting case, because I personally, I haven't been kind of that opposed to the token gating aspect of NFTs, but I can see long term, or even just accessibility wise, how it is kind of a negative or a hindrance. Like even right now with these nifty smashers, right? If anyone could go into their game and play it, maybe more people would be interested in buying one of these, right?
Exactly.
And if it was a free mint initially, and hadn't gone up to, I think at one point these things were even over an Ethereum, Ethereum for one of them. But yeah, if it was a lower bar to be able to purchase it, it kind of makes sense that you would be able to do more in that sense. Really interesting. I don't know. I like token gating on one hand. Like I like the idea of the community, only the community having access to something. But from a purely game dev side, I can see where you're coming from for sure.
But token gating doesn't need to be price gating, right? So I don't have any problem with token gating. What I have a problem with is artificial scarcity, right? So basically like what most game projects do is they say, oh, we're going to build all of this technology, but guess what? Only like 1,000 people will be able to. For me, that's just like fundamentally like a paradox, right? Like if you're building something, if you're building a game especially, you're building it so that it can be entertaining to a lot of people. So then it's like really like contradictory to go and say, we're going to limit the number of people that this game. You can do that when it's in alpha or when it's in beta or something like that.
Right.
But like in the long term, you want the game to be accessible to like a lot of people, because you're managing an economy over here, right? Like in Web3, you're managing an economy. Why the hell would you want to manage an economy that only maximum 10,000 people in it? Usually a lot less, because whales exist. So like maybe hundreds of people in it, right?
That's the thing. Yeah.
Why wouldn't you want to have an economy that the whole world could participate in? Because the first economy is at most like $1 million, like, millions of dollars in value. And the second economy is basically unbounded in value, right? Like it like literally that it's very short-sighted thinking that sort of exploits artificial scarcity in my mind.
No doubt. That's very accurate. Makes sense. It's hard to argue with that. So do you have a favorite Web3 game right now? Curious.
Conquest.eth is the one
Conquest.eth, eh? Very cool. Yeah.
It's still quite inaccessible, I would say. And but we did a very interesting thing in Conquest.eth. When the reason it was fun for us is the first time we tried to play Conquest.eth, there was this guild, like so it's a space diplomacy game, so there's a galaxy, there's a bunch of planets, you can like go and put money in. When you put money into the game, you get control of a planet, and then you can like sort of build fleets. You can attack other planets, and you can build like build your kingdom, or like build your space federation or whatever
Right.
inside the game. The first time we tried to play the game, we got a planet, and there was this like huge guild that controlled most of the galaxy. And as soon as we entered the game, they attacked us and they took our planet, right? They griefed us basically, right?
Right.
So that wasn't fun, and we were like, all right, what are we gonna do about this? Like, are we just gonna sit back and take this, or are we gonna do something? We decided to do something. So we built this is something that we could do as programmers, and this shows the power of like allowing people to build against your game, because Conquest Hadith is a quite decentralized and open game, open to people building on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
We wrote bots basically that went into the game and built like one of the largest fleets that game universe has ever seen. And we used that fleet. This happened over a period of like weeks, right? Maybe over a month. We just farmed like this gigantic like fleet basically, or a group of fleets, and we sent them into the heart of the empire to like basically take over their key planets, and like actually challenge their power. So that's something
Right.
we did. It was a lot of fun for us. Like we were strategizing. We built the bots, but we were still playing the game, right? Because we were engaging with the rules of the game at a very high level. We had to like very deeply understand the rules in order to make these bots like actually successful. So basically, for like a $30 or $40 gigantic fleet, and strike into the heart of the empire and like actually take over their planets temporarily, and we're sort of involved in an ongoing war with them at the moment, because they're quite powerful as well, and then they were able to take most of those planets back, and like all of this stuff. So we were able to do that, and like the whole idea that we had with the strategy, like analyzing the rules, actually executing them, that was the most fun that we've had as a team, because we played this as a team at Moonstream, right?
Nice.
So that was the most fun that we've ever had with a Web3 game as a team. And this was only possible because the game developer, it's a single guy. Actually, I think Ronan was involved. The guy who developed Conquest Hadith was like involved in the very early development of Sandbox. So I think he was
Oh,
like
wow.
quite instrumental in how the Sandbox played out. But anyway, it was fun because he's built a game that's open to players doing these kinds of things. Very few games are actually open to players doing these kinds of things. But yeah, that's the most fun that we've had.
Very
Web3 gaming.
cool. You're able to put your dev and
We wrote about it. Yeah, we wrote a story about it. So
your bot building skills to work.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. And our bot building tools are open source, so anybody can use them to build their own bots as well.
Nice.
So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds pretty interesting. What role do you think AR and VR are going to be playing in the Web3 gaming side of things? Especially AR. I've been really interested. I don't know if you're familiar with OVR. It's kind of a cool, accessible AR platform. But yeah, I think the gamification of just locations and kind of Pokemon Go style, right?
Yeah.
Being able to actually go to certain places that are geotagged and find an NFT. I find it really cool. I've done a little bit of they do play to earn on Over, where you can just walk around and go find little tokens around wherever you are. What do you think about AR? We'll start with AR and then I'll get into VR. But yeah, augmented reality. What do you think? Is Web3 going to have some good
I believe in the
opportunities?
potential of AR. Again, I think, for Web3, the way that I tend to think of it is in terms of the game communities and game universes. But I definitely see a role for AR experiences that are part of a game experience. I don't think the full game experience needs to be AR, and I don't think it ever will be. But I think like I can see like AR games, like for example, Pokemon Go style. But then you need to have like a deeper economy and deeper game mechanics that
Right.
support the stuff that you're doing with your Pokemons in the Pokemon Go sort of AR Web3 version, right?
Yeah.
The Step N has been very successful in this way as well, and I think that's a project. The interesting thing about AR projects is that they have data outside of Web3, right? Like if you're incentivized to go places, things, they have a lot of very valuable location data, and I'm really curious to see like a Web3 AR game, which monetizes that data and then shares the revenues with the player community. Where like if you go to interesting places, if you go to like location, because you can sell that data, for example, these people who are building like delivery robots or people who are building self-driving cars. There's a lot of people who buy that kind of location data from you, especially if there's like pictures taken and stuff like that. I would be interested to see like a Web3 version of that, which actually shares the value that it gets from selling the data with its player community. I would love to see the adoption of that.
Yeah, I think Over is kind of doing that from what I gather. Having you kind of walk around, scan the areas, and they do like scan to earn, where I guess you're helping them build their data, right? Their actual AR and actual real world IRL data on the ground. But then you do get a share of revenue after in their OVR tokens.
Because you're picking up tokens, right? Because you're picking up tokens. That's actually pretty cool. I'm going to look into Over. I had not heard about it, but I'll definitely look into it.
Cool. Yeah, but I'll share a link with you. They're really cool. And what I like about them, because another one that's out there is Superworld, you might have heard of. They're kind of similar to Superworld, except their pricing is far more accessible. And I actually think their functionality has a lot more kind of fun stuff, like I was just talking about with play to earn and different gamification opportunities. But most importantly, obviously, once you own a land, like a little hex that they call them, you can put up any NFT, any AR, like in the AR filter world, on that geolocation. So anybody who goes there can just open up the AR app and actually see everything that you've placed on that one square or hex in the real world. So yeah, I'm excited with AR. What about VR, virtual reality? Is there anything you've seen kind of really interesting out of the Web3 space? When I look at VR,
I'm a little more excited about AR than VR, by the way.
You're more excited by AR?
Yeah, I think so. I'm more excited about AR than VR. I think the VR experiences, I don't think I get motion sick when I play VR games. It's really hard for me to play games in general. But I haven't seen a VR game that I would be, really excited to play yet.
Yeah, the one I'm looking at is not a game, it's the Metaverse Omnium space. I think that they're doing the best as far as really trying to go for that kind of Ready Player One, like full immersion in the metaverse, but still have that full blockchain Web3 component of the metaverse where you really can own and build any digital asset and trade all the assets within the world, like something like Sandbox or Decentraland. You have a little bit less kind of control over your assets, and I would say that the quality of the assets are not as high as well, whereas Somnium Space, I believe they allow Unreal, or it might be Unity, but it's definitely high fidelity. But yeah, definitely the motion sickness is a real problem for some people. And I too
also I think the technology just needs to get better before it'll take a while for that to get to the
those goggles where, like, they need to be more accessible. Like, I'm not a big fan of Oculus or Meta myself either, so I'm not rushing to buy one of those.
also the user experience around movement needs to be better, right? Like there's a lot of stuff that just needs to get better about VR technology. I mean, Meta is investing a lot in this, right? Like Facebook is just put everything behind this, so maybe they'll be able to make a dent, but all of their stuff is proprietary, and I don't know how
super proprietary, the opposite of Web3, and I don't think they're interested.
Exactly.
There was that one brief moment where they were flirting with creating a cryptocurrency and they got shut down, but I don't think
I don't know if they learned anything from Libra. I mean, I like that, I live in the Bay Area, and like they were very, very actively pushing the Libra blockchain. And they changed the name of it at a point. Like very actively pushing it, like, trying to get developers to build on it and stuff like that. Right. And then ultimately, like, if you made that decision, then you ended up in deep shit, basically, because they decided to stop supporting it. And now I think those guys have gone and they're building some other, like, VC funded blockchain, like Aptos, I think came out of that.
It's wild how much VCs will sink their money into all these random coins, hey?
Well, it's an interesting thing. I think the VCs are basically taking a very large and very intelligent bet in that, like, if you look at how Solana works, there's a lot of mafia dynamics around, like, building in Solana, and, like, the funding is available to and stuff like that. It's like a close circle of people who are sort of all in bed together that are, like, trying to will that ecosystem into existence, and it might still work, right? Like, it's just not an ecosystem that's very decentralized in terms of, like, who's pulling the strings and stuff like that.
How does that differ from the early days of Ethereum? I know I've heard some critics say that, Ethereum, when it just started out by the Ethereum Foundation, it was fairly centralized as well, right? Like, you kind of have to start.
It's why the DAO fork could happen. It's why the DAO fork could happen, right? That sort of, like, turned me off of it a while as well. But now that's not the case. So that's what I'm saying. Like, Solana ultimately be successful, and the bet could pay off for, like, like Sam Bankman-Fried and A16Z and all of these guys, like the bet could really pay off. Like they're putting the hard work in right now, and they're trying to like sort of will that entire ecosystem into existence.
Yeah.
And it's still an open question whether it will become huge or whether it'll just sort of like stagnate. That's still a completely open question right now. But how do we start talking about this?
Just talking about the decentralization of the blockchains and
yeah. So but and they could follow the same sort of path as Ethereum, right? Like if it does become big, then the blockchain would become more decentralized in the long term. But these people who like put that effort and put up that initial like really insane amounts of capital required
seriously,
they would be rewarded for it like quite substantially, right? So that's the bet that they're taking, and it'll be interesting to see how it pans out.
I'm kind of standing back and giving them a little bit of credit. I have a few Solana NFTs more so on the art side because formfunction.xyz is a really cool one-of-one art NFT site that's come up over the last, I don't know, year, not even a year maybe, on Solana, and they have really good art over there, and that's the main thing, just like Tezos too. Like I'll go wherever the art leads me when it comes to NFTs, as long as I'm like somewhat interested in the blockchain. So Solana, like everything you just said, I think it's a big bet. There's no guarantee right now, but Star Atlas for one is very interesting to me. But also a lot of the other kind of like high fidelity 3D assets that I've seen coming out of Solana, I'm very interested in. So to your point, hopefully the bet pays off. Personally, I hope it does. I want to see Solana do well. I want to see their metaverse things take off because they don't even have a metaverse right now that you can actually go hang out in, unlike Ethereum, where you can go to voxels, you can go to Decentraland, Sandbox, Somnium Space. So it's kind of interesting how they're not quite even decentralized enough, I think, to actually justify a metaverse at this point, because you just can't have that full certainty that you're going to buy.
Well, I think it's just hard to build on Solana. I think the problem with Solana is not that it's not decentralized enough, because none of those other experiences really decentralization to like, Decentraland would work even if
Ethereum that's true, for sure.
Yeah, but it's much easier to build on Ethereum right now because it's been around long for ecosystem than Solana does.
Sorry, your mic cut out a little bit there. It's been doing a little choppy every once in a while. So just repeat your point about the ecosystem there.
Oh yeah, it's just harder to build on Solana. I think one of the problems that I see for the Solana Foundation is that the Solana Foundation has been trying to like drive a lot of development internally. So they have developers inside the Solana Foundation who are creating projects like Metaplex, which is the Solana sort of native competitor to OpenSea. Although I think Fractal is much better, which is also built on Solana as an NFT marketplace. But they're doing a lot of that development internally, which means they're competing for developers with the projects that are building on their ecosystem. So it's a fundamentally very if you look at the Ethereum Foundation, was like basically engaging with people who are developing like the blockchain layer, like the Geth node and like the actual infrastructure for their blockchain, and they were getting other projects to build like the application layer on the blockchain. With Solana, the Solana Foundation is building both the blockchain layer and the application layer, which means that they're competing with projects that are built on Solana that want to build their own application, like their own applications by themselves on the Solana blockchain.
And why do you think that is? It's just too much VC influence, or like what? Why are they rushing into the application side instead of just focusing on their foundational blockchain?
It's a difficult technology to integrate with. So like Solana flavor of Rust programs. First of all, they chose Rust, which already precludes a lot of people. Like it's just a huge overhead to get started building on that blockchain. I think that's one of the problems. I don't know exactly how they're thinking about it. We were sort of talking to various teams inside the Solana Foundation last summer, and at some point I realized those conversations weren't going to go anywhere because we weren't sort of in the in group, and we needed to focus, and so we focused on the EVM and on Ethereum and Ethereum L2s. So I've sort of been out of that world for a little while. I don't know what their thinking is over there, but I think they should probably clarify it.
Yeah, no doubt. No, you're shining a light on some of the I've heard, bits and pieces of everything you just said, but I think you clarified it a lot there. And yeah, remains to be seen. TBD, I think, on Solana. I wish them well, but nothing's 100%. So
Yeah, I own some Sol, so like I also hope they do well. But yeah, I'm
no
not like
doubt.
we're not building on Sol right now. So.
Yeah. I mean, right now it's pretty far down from its height of almost, what was it, 200 almost, or 150, and now
exactly.
it's like $30 or $25. Yeah, it's wild. It's wild.
Yeah.
All right. Well, the chat's been relatively quiet. I don't think we have any questions from the chat. I do want to wrap up soon. I know we're getting close. I want to respect your time, but I do always like to ask, what do you think about the FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and the idea, especially in the gaming space, that why bring more money and like focus on the money in gaming, like why not just let gamers play the game and not think about money at all? And when you bring the money into it, you're, creating greed and all of these negative things instead of, just focusing on having fun with the game. What do you say to that criticism?
Yeah, I think here I just, for anybody who plays games, I think it's important that you realize that the games that you're playing right now are basically exploiting you for value, especially multiplayer games. Okay, if you play a multiplayer game, you're being exploited for the value that you bring into that game. You might be having fun, but it's possible for you to have fun and sort of share in the value that you create for the game. That's really, for me, what the potential of Web3 gaming is. That's the long-term vision that like I and many other people are working to sort of turn into a reality. So, I sort of understand the hostility that a lot of traditional gamers have towards, blockchain gaming, stuff like this. But there are people who are sincerely building in the space, and it would be much easier to build with an engaged community. And that's we could have a future where we actually like sort of stop players being exploited and start sharing value, in game communities, like very openly and very equitable. That's really what I want to happen. So that doesn't warrant FUD, basically.
Yeah, it doesn't have to preclude fun, right? It doesn't have to it's not mutually exclusive, right? Yeah, imagine a gaming ecosystem where the original project team is supported and supporting the community and the devs, the gamers, all together creating value for each other, And yeah, the way Moonstream.to is really kind of creating this place to go to plug in and like say, hey, I want to gamify my project, and if you have devs on your team and all you need is that like last final touch, you'll help with that. But if you don't have the gaming devs on your team, we can reach out to you and see how to build with that. And just thinking back to the people I've spoken to on this show who have talked about wanting that gamified angle or have even conceptualized, what they're going to do, whether it's a chess game, whether it's, some kind of games that already exist on like mobile apps, but just adding a crypto component. I think Moonstream.to is going to be the place I recommend, just because I can tell you're doing it for the right reasons and you're coming from a very genuine kind of real space of, how do we solve these problems? And you're a gamer, most importantly.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's impossible to do this.
Yeah, that's the most important thing, as a true gamer wanting to help gamers and game developers, because much like the record industry, which I've spoken to some experts and people who have had experience in the record industry, and they can't wait for Web3 to disrupt that industry. I and you, obviously, and others see the value in Web3 disrupting the current gaming industry, which we know is very predatory towards a lot of developers, a lot of people working overtime for not enough money, all that kind of crazy stuff that we see in the space, right? And Web3 can be the solution for that. And so the hope is that we can resonate with more gamers. It's why we host this show on Twitch as well. And we really want to hear your feedback. Anyone who's listening to this podcast at any time and has any thoughts on it, you can reach out to us at web3warriors@gmail.com, and we'd love to have that conversation. And Neeraj, I hope we can have you back maybe after you have a few more fun games under your belt that you're working with. And we'd love to continue this conversation because I think it's just getting started. Who knows where Solana is going to be a year from now? Maybe you'll be like, I'm really surprised, So it's really awesome, Neeraj. You've got my mind going, and I could probably talk Web3 games for the rest of the afternoon, but I know you have a family you have to get back to. Did you have any final thoughts or anything you'd like to share before we wrap?
No, I think we've sort of given people a lot to think about if they care about
Most
Web3 gaming.
definitely.
And yeah, just thanks for having me on. I very much enjoyed the conversation.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Neeraj. It's been a really great conversation. We'll keep the whole conversation about this Web3 creator economy pushing forward. We'll be back next week, as always, 12 p.m. Eastern with Web3 Warriors. And until then, we'll catch you all in the Metaverse. Take care.